The lights rose in a carefully measured glow across the studio floor, the kind that made every surface look softer than it really was. The crowd clapped in rhythmic bursts, trained by unseen stage managers but animated by genuine anticipation. This wasn't just another daytime segment, it felt heavier, as if the nation's eyes had quietly drifted toward this room. Kelly Clarkson adjusted herself in her chair, leaning forward with that familiar mix of warmth and steel. She had built her brand on candor, on being the woman who said what others swallowed. Her smile stretched across the stage like a welcome mat, but her eyes hinted at something more deliberate. Selena Gomez sat opposite, poised but restless. Her hands folded neatly, then unfolded. She tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, forcing a practiced smile. She had lived through this circus for years, the lights, the cameras, the questions dressed as casual banter. Yet tonight, the air crackled differently. Kelly's voice carried first, gentle but probing. You know, I've talked a lot on this show about the pressure women feel in this industry. I've battled it myself, the comments, the weight, the expectations. When I see you, Selena, I see someone who's carried even more than I have, and still. She tilted her head, letting the sentence hang in suspension, daring the silence to provoke honesty. Selena inhaled slowly. She knew where this was going. Her smile sharpened into irony, not joy. Still smiling? Still breathing? Still pretending it doesn't crush me? Her words carried a soft sting, the kind that cloaked itself as humor but landed with venom. The audience gasped, some nervously laughing as though unsure if they had just witnessed wit or rebellion. Phones lit up instantly, thumbs typing furiously, recording clips that would outlive this conversation by years. Kelly's brow arched. For a moment, the friendly-ness slipped, revealing a sliver of challenge. I didn't mean pretending, I meant surviving. There's a difference. Selena tilted her head, lips curled. Surviving is what you call it? I call it living under a microscope while strangers decide if my body, my music, my very existence is acceptable today. Maybe tomorrow they'll applaud. Maybe the next day, they'll crucify. The tension snapped across the room like a whip. Applause sputtered, unsure whether to support or shrink back. One woman in the audience murmured to her neighbor, "Did she just mock Kelly?" The camera crew kept steady, but even the lenses seemed to lean closer, as if trying to capture not just the sound, but the electricity sparking between them. Kelly crossed her arms gently, her smile now defensive. "You think I don't know what that feels like?" Selena's laugh was low, brief, unkind. "Of course you do. But when I say it, people call me dramatic. When you say it, they call you brave." The crowd froze. The weight of that statement hung heavy, unshakable. It wasn't just about two women on a stage. It was about an entire culture of judgment, of double standards, of wounds dressed in applause. The host leaned forward again, her voice quieter, more pointed. "So, which one are you being right now? Dramatic or brave?" Selena's eyes narrowed, her chin lifting in defiance. She didn't answer directly. Instead, she smirked, and her silence mocked more loudly than any words could. And with that, the first sparks of a confrontation were lit, sparks that would ignite into something larger, something unforgiving, something no stage manager could ever contain. The applause faded, leaving a silence heavy enough to press against the walls of the studio. Selena shifted in her seat, her hands briefly clasping, then loosening again. She had learned the choreography of deflection long ago. Smile, deflect, turn pain into ire. The rules had been carved into her as a teenager, when her career became public property before she was old enough to understand what privacy meant. The audience saw a confident woman in her 30s, radiant under studio lights. What they did not see was the armor she wore, forged over years of ridicule, betrayal, and invasive speculation. Her voice came soft but edged. "You know, I think sarcasm is the only language I can still trust. If I start speaking in sincerity, people turn it into a headline. If I joke, at least I own the punchline." A man in the audience leaned forward, whispering to his friend, "She's not joking, though." The whisper caught the rhythm of the room, the awareness that beneath Selena's mocking tone was exhaustion, layered thick and undeniable. Kelly leaned back slightly, measuring the words, her posture still composed. You call it sarcasm. Others call it avoidance. Selena smirked, her gaze fixed, steady. Avoidance keeps me alive. Her words landed not like a defense, but like testimony. The crowd stiffened, listening as though the studio had become a courtroom, each sentence a sworn statement under oath. Her mind flickered with memory, the tabloid covers critiquing her body, the paparazzi ambushes when lupus drained her strength, the online swarms dissecting her every relationship. She had been mocked, shamed, bullied into silence, and yet, here she sat, still present, still visible. Do you know what it feels like? She continued, her voice now firmer. To wake up and realize millions of strangers are deciding if you're allowed to be human that day. They don't want sincerity. They want entertainment. So I give them irony. They can't twist a smirk as easily as they twist a confession. Her words rang across the room. Some audience members nodded slowly, as if recalling their own smaller battles with judgment. Others looked uncomfortable, unsure if this level of rawness was what they had signed up for. Kelly tried to intervene gently. But don't you think? Selena cut in quickly, the edge of impatience slicing her tone. Don't I think it makes me bitter? Maybe it does, but bitterness is safer than vulnerability. The crowd shifted in their seats, the sound of movement filling the silence that followed. Her face softened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, the armor cracked, revealing something fragile beneath. Every time I've tried to be open, it's been used against me. When I speak about my illness, people accuse me of exploiting it. When I share my pain, they call me dramatic. Irony is my last shield. If I mock first, at least I don't have to watch them mock me. The studio air thickened, heavy with empathy and unease. A woman in the second row clutched her chest, whispering, "She's breaking." But Selena straightened again, pulling the mask back on. The smile returned, wry, deliberate, sharp. So yes, Kelly, I use sarcasm, because sincerity is a luxury I can't afford. Her voice carried finality, like a gavel striking wood. The testimony was over, but the weight of it lingered. This wasn't just a conversation about celebrity, it was a revelation of survival, of how irony had become both her weapon and her prison. And as the camera zoomed in on her smirk, the world outside the studio began to take sides, each viewer deciding whether that smirk was defiance, dismissal, or the only truth Selena Gomez had left to give. The silence that followed Selena's declaration did not last long. Kelly inhaled slowly, her shoulders rising with measured control, the kind of breath a seasoned performer takes before stepping onto a stage. But this was not a concert, and the stage she stood on now demanded a different kind of performance, one rooted in candor, stripped of melody. Her eyes locked onto Selena's, not with hostility, but with something sterner, resolve. Kelly Clarkson had lived too long in a world where silence was demanded of women, where compliance was mistaken for grace. She was not about to let this moment pass without naming it for what it was. You call sincerity a luxury, she began, her voice calm but weighted. I call it survival. I've been torn apart in magazines for my body, judged by strangers for my choices, laughed at for not fitting the pop star mold. And yes, I've used honesty as my only weapon, because when I say it first, nobody can use it against me. Her words resonated, a mirror held up to Selena's irony. The crowd shifted again, murmurs passing like currents through the room. One man whispered, "She's not backing down." Selena crossed her arms, the faintest smirk tugging at her lips. So you fight with truth. I fight with mockery. Two women, two shields. But why does yours get called brave while mine gets called rude? The remark cut with precision. Kelly paused, letting the sting linger before she answered. Maybe because people believe me when I speak. They've seen my mess, my tears, my flaws. I don't smirk through them. I don't soften them with irony. I let them stand in the light. Her voice cracked slightly at the edges, not weakness but passion. She gestured with her hand, open and firm, like a lawyer presenting evidence. You can't heal in the dark, Selena. You can't fight shame with sarcasm. You have to call it by its name. The audience erupted in applause, some standing briefly before sitting back down, their enthusiasm tinged with discomfort at witnessing what felt less like television and more like a public reckoning. Selena's smile faltered just for a second. Her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt, of recognition, before the mask snapped back into place. "You say that like it's easy, like standing in the light doesn't burn." Kelly leaned forward, voice low but carrying. "Of course it burns. That's the point. But the fire purifies. It leaves you scarred, yes, but free." The crowd went silent, the kind of silence that turns into reverence. Even the camera operators seemed to lean into, their lenses, capturing the moment as if they too knew history was unfolding here. Not music history, not talk show history, but a cultural confrontation over what it meant to be honest in a world addicted to spectacle. Selena lowered her gaze briefly, her fingers tapping against the armrest of her chair. She did not yield, but she did not attack either. The irony that had been her shield now hung heavier, tested by Kelly's candor. In that instant, the two women were no longer just celebrities. They were advocates for two opposing philosophies of survival: sarcasm versus sincerity, armor versus exposure. And the studio audience, serving as jury, watched with the intensity of those witnessing a trial whose verdict could alter more than reputations. It could alter the very narrative of how women survive in public life. Kelly's final words of the moment landed like a gavel. "Don't confuse sarcasm with strength. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak without a mask." The applause thundered again, raw and conflicted, carrying with it the promise that this clash was far from over. The applause faded into a scatter of uneasy murmurs. In the studio, the audience sat suspended between awe and discomfort, their bodies restless in their seats, eyes darting from Selena to Kelly as if tracking a duel in real time. The energy felt less like a talk show now, and more like a courtroom where the jury had not been sequestered, where every gasp, every clap, every withheld cheer became part of the record. A woman in the third row whispered under her breath, "She's mocking her. Did you hear that tone?" Another shook her head quickly. No, she's protecting herself. That's not mockery. It's survival." These whispers rippled outward like currents in a trial chamber. The cameras cut from Selena's wry smirk to Kelly's steady gaze, then panned across the crowd. Each expression told its own verdict. Some eyes wide with admiration for Kelly's honesty, others softened with empathy for Selena's wounded irony. And beyond the studio, the verdict was already spilling onto screens across the globe. Clips were uploaded to TikTok within seconds, 30-second bursts of confrontation replayed in endless loops. One user captioned their clip, "Selena mocking Kelly? Wow!" Another fired back with, "No, Kelly's gaslighting her pain." The war of perception had begun. In the glow of her phone, a young fan typed furiously, "This is exactly why Selena doesn't open up. Women can't win. Too honest, they're weak. Too sarcastic, they're cruel." Another voice, equally impassioned, wrote, "Kelly is right. Enough hiding behind jokes. Real strength is truth." The hashtags split into factions, #Team Selena and #Team Kelly. For every clip that framed Selena as dismissive, another painted her as courageous. For every post praising Kelly's candor, another accused her of pressing too hard, of exploiting vulnerability for ratings. Inside the studio, Kelly tried to regain the air of composure. She raised her hand slightly, a gesture of both control and invitation. "I think the audience understands what's happening here. This isn't just about us. This is about how we, as women, are allowed, or not allowed, to show our pain." A smattering of applause rose, hesitant but supportive. Selena tilted her head, her voice calm but laced with edge. "No, this is about how the audience decides what version of us is acceptable. Today, I'm mocked for being sarcastic. Tomorrow, you'll be mocked for crying. Either way, the jury always rules against us." Gasps rippled again, followed by heavy silence. In that silence, her words clung to the rafters, undeniable. The studio audience was no longer neutral. They were complicit, their reactions feeding the spectacle. Each laugh, each gasp, each sigh became evidence, archived forever in the cameras rolling. On Twitter, journalists had already begun drafting threads. The Clarkson G.O.M.A.'s exchange reveals deeper truths about gendered vulnerability in media. One wrote, attaching a still of Selena's smirk. Others were less forgiving. Mocking someone's honesty isn't strength, it's cruelty. The scene was metastasizing, leaving the confines of the studio and flooding into living rooms, offices, phones, and group chats. A man near the back of the studio stood briefly, clapping. "Speak your truth, Kelly," he shouted. Another voice countered, sharp and emotional. "No, listen to her pain, don't demand it." Security motioned for silence, but the damage was done. The audience had fractured, no longer a passive body, but an active jury, split in its interpretation of the testimony unfolding on stage. Selena looked out over the crowd, her smirk softening, eyes glistening just for a moment before she blinked it away. "See? The jury's already picked sides. I don't even need to testify anymore." Her words lingered like a closing argument, while Kelly, steadying her breath, prepared her rebuttal. And outside the studio, millions more joined the deliberation, their comments, hashtags, and headlines becoming the gavel that would deliver a verdict neither woman had asked for, but both would be forced to endure. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the tension eased, but the atmosphere did not soften. It deepened. What the audience had just witnessed between Selena and Kelly was not born in that single room on that single night. It was the product of decades, an entire history of an industry that built stars only to dissect them under the harsh light of public opinion. Selena sat back, her gaze unfocused for a fleeting moment. She was not seeing the stage anymore. She was seeing the headlines, the photographs, the endless judgment that had haunted her since childhood. At barely 15, she had been cast not just as a Disney ingenue, but as a role model, a crown heavy with expectation and impossible to wear without bruising. By her 20s, her private struggles with lupus, anxiety, and heartbreak had been plastered across magazines as if they were plot twists in a soap opera, rather than the fragility of a young woman's life. The narration of her pain had never belonged to her. She had learned, brick by brick, to build her armor of irony against it. Across from her, Kelly Clarkson carried her own weight of history. She had been crowned by America on the very first season of American Idol, her victory celebrated as the embodiment of democratic stardom. Yet even in triumph, the criticisms had never ceased. Her body became a battleground, her personal choices open for public ridicule. Tabloids mocked her weight fluctuations more than they praised her vocal brilliance, and when she spoke candidly about her divorce or about mental health, the press often twisted those confessions into soundbites of scandal rather than testimonies of resilience. Kelly's candor was not born from ease. It was forged in the same fires of scrutiny that had shaped Selena. If Selena's shield was irony, Kelly's sword was truth. Both weapons pointed back to the same enemy, a culture addicted to the spectacle of women's pain. The audience could sense it, even if only subconsciously. The clash they were watching was not personal venom, but structural collision. It was the sound of two survivors clashing not because they hated each other, but because the world had demanded they embody opposing archetypes, the sarcastic deflector versus the candid truth-teller. On Twitter, think pieces were already surfacing. One read, "This is bigger than Clarkson versus Gomez. This is about how society punishes women no matter what armor they choose." Another countered, harsher, "Mockery is not empowerment. Honesty is. Kelly shows the way." But even these commentaries failed to grasp the full truth. Both women, in their own ways, were victims of the same cycle. Both had been placed on pedestals only to be knocked down, over and over, for daring to exist imperfectly. Selena broke the silence first, her voice lower, almost reflective. "You know, Kelly, they've been writing about me since I was a kid. None of it was ever mine to control. The only control I have left is whether I laugh at it or not." Kelly listened, her expression softening with recognition. "I know. Trust me, I know. They wrote about me too. But I decided they wouldn't get the last word. I would." Selena tilted her head, her smirk gone now, replaced by something more vulnerable. And did it work? Did telling your story first ever stop them from twisting it? Kelly exhaled, the weight of years hanging in that breath. No, but it gave me peace. That's the difference. The crowd sat still, silent. They were no longer just witnesses to a clash. They were listening to testimony etched in the scars of two women who had survived the same trial, though they had chosen different weapons. And somewhere in that shared weight of history, the audience sensed that the conflict was not between Selena Gomez and Kelly Clarkson. The conflict was between two strategies of survival in an unforgiving world. The room held its silence like a breath, waiting. The clash of candor and irony had left the audience divided, but now all eyes turned back to Selena. Her shoulders rose slightly as if bracing for impact, and when she spoke, her voice carried less of the mocking lilt that had armored her before. It was so, teedier, deeper, almost confessional. "I've spent most of my life as a headline," she began, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the cameras. "People don't see me as a person. They see a story to consume, a spectacle to pick apart." Her hands moved as she spoke, slow and deliberate. "When I was diagnosed with lupus, I didn't even want to tell anyone. I thought maybe I could fight it privately, quietly. But the moment I disappeared from the stage, they wrote their own stories. Selena's falling apart. Selena's weak. Selena's finished. So I told the truth. And they still twisted it. They said I was using my illness for attention." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Selena's voice tightened, her words deliberate. "And then came the kidney transplant. Do you know what it feels like to owe your life to a friend's sacrifice while strangers turn it into entertainment? People judged the way I thanked her, the way I healed, the way I gained weight after medication. I survived death, and still, it wasn't enough for them." Her tone cracked, not with anger, but with a tremor that sounded like grief. She paused, steadying herself, and then continued. "They analyze my body like it's public property. Every photo becomes evidence in a trial I never signed up for. If I gain weight, I'm lazy. If I lose weight, I'm sick. If I smile, I'm fake. If I cry, I'm unstable. So tell me, what's left? Where in all of that am I allowed to just be Selena?" The studio seemed to shrink, the applause lights forgotten. Even Kelly, usually quick to interject, remained silent, listening as though bound by the same reverence as everyone else. Selena's eyes glistened. She didn't wipe away the tears. She let them stand. "They tell me to be strong, to be a role model. But strength to them means silence. It means smiling through pain, playing the perfect pop star. If I tell the truth, I'm dramatic. If I mock the truth, I'm cruel. If I stay silent, I'm complicit. There is no version of me they won't punish.